This is Aaron Prisby. I'm here with St. George City Council candidate Ed Baca. He was kind enough to let us come into his home. And we're calling this, Ed, 5 questions. And so there's just 5 questions I wanted to ask you. And are we good? Are we?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm always glad to answer questions.
All right. The first question I have is, if there's conclusive evidence that code enforcement illegally searched residents' property here in St. George, would you be in favor of reimbursing the fine that the residents have paid?
Well, you mentioned the word conclusive, and so it's where we present this evidence. You know, I would hope that we could settle this out of court without having to go through the judicial process and the cost to the city that would entail. But the real issue is doing what's right for the citizens and for the city. And I think, we have a responsibility, and I'm sure that's the thinking of city government, is to protect the city from a large lawsuits. My concern when we talk about that is, we have our budget established, we have so much money in the city coffers, and that if it was to come out that the city had to reimburse the hundreds of thousands of dollars, or maybe even more, depending on what the violations entailed, that they could put a real burden on the city. So my first response to you is to get an out-of-court settlement, to do the right thing. If the evidence reveals that people were unjustly fined and that that was an act that should not have been taken, I think that there's history in the city having changed or adjusted penalties and made reimbursements in the past, and certainly that would be appropriate.
Okay. The next question I had, we've been up and running for 2 months, and we've had over 10,000 people view our Facebook page, and there are literally thousands of people who are upset over code enforcement. Are you willing to review all of our codes and even repeal or modify oppressive codes, and in particular giving due weight to the person who's actually paying the mortgage on the property?
I think when you look at that whole process, there's been clearly some evidence that indicates that the behavior and the conduct may have not have been as we would have expected it to be, and certainly warrants adjustments. I have to tell you, over the last 10 years that I've been monitoring city council activities, we've discussed, and I say we, meaning the city, has discussed the issue of overseeing some of the codes and ordinances. They've never got around to it. It's one of those things they never can get to. And part of that is because of the sheer volume of work that some of the part-time councilmen have to do. But this was supposed to be something that was supposed to be done a long time ago. So I'm a little dismayed that it hasn't been done, and that's one of the reasons I keep pushing for a code enforcement commission. I think we need to have independent representation on this board to show the business interest and the residential interest. And a lot of people are very concerned with what's next door to them and how it's left to appear. But it's an issue of property rights, whether it's code enforcement and zoning, or whether it's how you use your property or how you maintain your property. Those issues affect all of us, and we need to discuss them openly. And there's no doubt that there's codes that have to be taken off the books. They're just not needed, or they're inappropriate, and they're just unenforceable. So yes, I think that's absolutely essential that we do that. And you need somebody on the council that's going to stand up and do it.
Right.
And that's what it gets down to. But do the right thing.
Right. Well, thanks. Third question I have. We received quite a bit of information about self-dealing, preferential treatment, and selective code enforcement relating to people involved in city government. As a city council member, how is it that you can find out if that is actually going on, and if so, what would you do to rectify that situation?
Well, Aaron, as I told you, I've been doing this for 10 years. I know that there's selective enforcement going on. You see it over the period of time. You can't not see it. And issues, whether it be, I won't even give you names, because we know that these people are maybe holding office, or other business people in town that get the preferential treatment. It appears that way. And so if it's just perceived to be that way, there's something that needs to be addressed. You know, when I drive down the street and I see businesses that are parking their vehicles on dirt instead of paved, what's the word I'm looking for? Instead of pavement as required by the code, and you see that they're not enforcing it. And I've had occasion to talk to representatives in the city and I said, you know, I see these violations, why aren't we getting to them? Well, we're going to, you know, we're going to get to them. Well, we never get to them. And so there's a selective enforcement takes place. There's no doubt about it. And why is this allowed to take place? It's because we tolerate that type of behavior from the ones we've already elected that are supposed to be doing the right thing. I think they've just kind of forgotten, and this is why the good old boys get such a bad name. There's nothing wrong with being a good old boy, because in my estimation, a good old boy is somebody who loves their country and believes in God and family. But there's a big difference when you start showing favoritism to individuals that you've grown up with or gone to school with or in business with. And the guy next door leaves something out in his front yard, and we're all over him, but not the one who we've known and gone to school with. That's just not right. And so those are the type of things we need to really address, and yeah, we need to clean that up. And we have to have a level playing field for all businesses. If one business has to comply and another one doesn't, that affects the bottom line on cost. And that's been going on. I mean, I could tell you things that I've uncovered over the period of years, but I've not made them public because we have a tendency, and some of our elected officials will be very vocal about it. Well, you're just destroying or you're tearing down. If you don't go along with us, you're being destructive. They spin it on you because they don't want anybody looking at them. And this is part of the problem. There's no accountability. That's what we need. Besides setting these goals that we have to follow, there has to be some accountability. You see it in today's, news. So you read it and say, well, we shouldn't be bringing up these things during an election. If you don't bring them up during the election, when do you bring them up? When do you clean your house? When do you get your elected officials to do the right thing if you don't want to offend them? You know, this issue of being contentious, we don't want that. But we have to be open and honest and talk about things just like you would within your own family. If you have a child that's using drugs, you're going to do turn your back and not ignore it? Or are you going to address it? It's the same basic principle with enforcing our code enforcements. Do the right thing, set the level of the bar high enough where we have pride and we can hold our heads up knowing we're doing the right thing, and not be afraid to mention something's wrong because we want to make the mayor look bad, or we want to make a city councilman look bad. The idea is not to make them look bad. The idea is to fix the problem,
Right.
and make it better for us.
Ed, I told you I was going to only ask 5 questions. Is it okay if I follow up on what you just said?
Oh, feel free.
You said over 10 years you've seen some things that are going on that are inappropriate. Can you give us a kind of an idea of the, what you're comfortable saying and the type of things that you've seen that need to be corrected?
Well, I've refrained from making allegations directly because for that very thing. I don't want people to think that I'm just trying to get elected and being throwing out vague or open comments without substance. But when you look at, as I gave you the first example, when you see some businesses that are complying with the code, even to the extent where you see where some businesses, it's a requirement that they have the frontage with trees or plants, and you'll see some have been here for years, they haven't complied. We're still getting issues like that. I mean, you can see those things on a regular basis. I've had some requests that when I've met with Brock Belknap, the county attorney, to look into an issue a few years back because I was thinking that perhaps it might be beneficial for the city to have districts. The city is so large that we can't get the representation that we need. An issue came up on the funding and how that was funded to fight that, and that was led by the mayor and the then council to avoid that. The idea of where the money came from and how it was placed in in an agency that was a government agency and private agency, you know, it flies in the face of direct openness, and as to whether it's appropriate to be using a public agency to help our council, for example, or our city government fight having districts. In other words, they're using taxpayers' money to fight what the taxpayers are signing the petition to do. That actually happened.
And that was the mayor and the prior city council that did that?
That's correct. And so, you know, now, without discussing the details of it, you know, but I presented that information to the county attorney. He looked into it and he said, what do you want to do? And I told him quite clearly, we're not here to seek prosecution to say that this individual committed a crime, because we're looking at a borderline issue. But the idea is to fix it so that doesn't happen. And it was fixed as a result of that. And we did it without having to go to court. And I think that's good. So that was a process that was, I thought, helpful, because it's no longer going to happen.
But what you're saying is there was a public referendum to district the city, and private funds were taken by the mayor and the city council, and they stopped that process?
Well, what happened was we had to put that issue on the ballot. There was 3 of us that went, and we stood out at various businesses to gather the signatures that had to be gathered to qualify to have it placed on the ballot. We did that. It was placed on the ballot. The mayor had previously told me that as long as he was in office, there would never be districts, and he absolutely, that was all there was to it. And that's where I got on the wrong side of the city council, because I was hoping to have broader representation throughout the community. Right. And so yeah, I know they circle the wagons on me. I've been beat up quite a bit by you know, city government in a lot of ways, because it acts as a political machine. And so that it was placed on the ballot and it was voted on it, but during that process they needed some money to fight that. And I know, you know, that a trucking company in town was, the owner supported that financially. And I believe that's the one. And that money was then put into this agency that's private and government, and they used the money from there to have the necessary.
Oh, so you're saying the mayor actually used public funds to stop that?
Well, I'm just saying that if it's in a public agency that we contribute to, and that agency participates in that process by allowing their bank account to be used to draw that money out, we don't know. That's the problem.
But ultimately, from the use of those public funds, they helped to defeat the.
Well, no, it was the funds that were contributed by this trucking company that helped defeat it, because you know, it amounted to about $8,000, if I recall right. And of course, that entails the usage of the assets of this agency. So, and that's being paid for by the public. So
what was the agency the funds were placed in to then go ahead and help defeat the ordinance?
Well, that was the Washington County Economic Council that does, you know, for the benefit of bringing in industry into the city. And so that's when that issue came around. We said, this is just not right.
So you were taking on essentially a state representative and the mayor in that.
Well,
I mean, that was your opposition.
I don't know, state representative. I don't know what you mean by a state representative, but I'm saying.
Well, the state representative that we now have is. Yeah.
Well, you know who owns that trucking company, and
right.
So I'm reluctant to give a name to it, because I don't want to get involved in a mudslinging thing or a lawsuit.
What was their purpose in why would they not want the districts? Why would they go to such?
Because the city would lose control. You know, they have 5 councilmen that they handpick pretty much. You can see from this election that we're seeing who, you know, just from where the donations come from, and who they really want. I can tell you, without any doubt in my mind, after 10 years of doing this, and this may not help me to get elected, but I've never been in this thing just to win an election. I've been in these races all these years to make effective change and to get items squared away that needed to be squared away, just like the code enforcement. And that's what I've been fighting, and then I've been fighting City Hall to do that.
So you want to stop the self-dealing and the appearance of corruption,
Absolutely.
and the lack of transparency, the same things that we're addressing at Case.
Absolutely. And I'm not taking sides with what you're trying to
Right.
do or with what the city's trying to do, because I have a tendency to want to protect the city. But I am strongly committed to doing the right thing. And I very strongly dislike injustice.
Okay.
Whether it's racial prejudice or whether it's religious prejudice or whatever. I do not like injustice. And with some of the things I've seen over the years, we needed to clean this thing up without hurting somebody's feelings.
Right, and that's where you and I guess, we diverge paths, because I don't care about their feelings. If they've been involved in illegal activity, I want to shut them down.
Well,
and I respect your
right,
opinion.
and because, you know, I recognize that we have cultural values here, we have traditions here, and it's really hard to come in and when you point issues out and they say, well, you just, you know, what got me into this whole process was when I built this house. They had the codes written 2 ways. And I did. I thought I came to Zion. I thought I was here with a bunch of righteous, straightforward people. I didn't really, I just felt pretty good about being here. But when I went to see the mayor to discuss this, he gave me about 2 minutes. He always says he's open. He gave me 2 minutes, and what he basically says, go see the department head. He didn't want to talk to me. He never did talk to me about it. And so I went to see the department head, and he told me if I didn't like it, sue the city. And it's that attitude, that lack of respect, that put me into attending city council meetings for 10 years and for wanting to affect change. Because I believe that no matter what station in life you hold, your city government, your county government, and your federal government should treat the citizens with due process and with respect. And when they fail to do that, that's why we have such a mess in our country overall that we're experiencing. That's my thoughts, and that's my whole ideas on this.
So we've been doing this for 2 months, but you've been fighting it for 10 years.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've gone over my 5 questions. I have 2 more.
Okay. Go ahead.
I really appreciate what you're doing, taking time sitting down with us. I do have a couple more.
As I said, this may not help me get elected, but I have this tendency to be straight about certain issues. And I'm not going to give you a song and dance. I'm not in the business, I'm not a politician to give you a dog and pony show like we've been seeing for a few years.
And just for those who are looking at this, I offered to let you see our questions in advance. You said you didn't want to see them. You just wanted me to come and ask you questions. Is that right?
That's correct. I think we just answer and be honest about it.
Ed, if there are any misconceptions about you or your campaign, and I don't know that there are, this might apply to some of the other candidates, but if there is any misconceptions about you, what are they, and how would you like to correct those?
Well, as we just discussed, one of the misconceptions has been is how they spin these things, because if you dare to bring them up, now you're the one destroying or being counterproductive. And that's the exact opposite. I've been trying to be productive by making positive changes. And it just like some of these elections, I've been told that there's certain representatives of the city who would tell city employees that if you elect Ed, you're going to lose your job. That he wants to, to take your job away. There's just so much. City Hall has been involved in politics. City employees have been allowed to participate right from the top down in violation of their own policy and procedures. You're not supposed to do this if you're a city employee on city time. And it's just little stuff like that. When you add it up, and you add up all these small things, it gets to be a picture of the character of those who are really guiding and steering the ship here. But we don't want to cast aspersions on them, because after all, we go to church with them. They're in our stake or in our wards, and it's even worse than that. We went to school with them, and we can wave the Dixie flag and sing the song, and that makes everything okay, and we can turn our heads and look away and feel good about it. Well, I don't believe that that's how we should do business. I think when you see something wrong, you make it right. And that's what I've tried to do. And as a result of it, yeah, I've been carrying, every time I've run, and people say, how can we run so often? I didn't run just against one council, the opponent. I was running against the political machine in the city hall. And so, yeah, it's taken its toll, and it's cost me a lot of money.
Yeah. So,
But I felt dedicated to do that. That was my contribution to trying to improve the community.
so is it the feel I have from the amount of comments, and we have got a lot of private comments. You have the public officials, but there is a lot of concern about the non-elected officials over at city government, kind of running the show and pushing things through. Is that your feel in 10 years down there that that's what's going on?
Well, it's happened. There's no question about it. You know, and I'll give you an example. There's some people. The chamber is very active in local politics. They have their sunshine group, goes to all these things, and there's been some of those have been very active in campaigning for the mayor over the years and for council people, and they've been very active in some of the things they've said. Now, one of those individuals happens to now be on the planning commission. She also happens to be the mother of the assistant to the city manager. I think that there's a potential conflict of interest there. And whether, you know, she has a right to participate and to express herself politically, but when her son sits as the assistant to the city manager and he has this close relationship with his mother, I would expect, you have to ask, why would the mayor appoint his mother? What are her qualifications? Where's the discussion that took place? Because I know that it might be because she's supported him all these years and campaigned for him. Is that a tantamount to a payoff? You know, is this how we do business? And you know, you can get into this thing and it sounds ugly and it sounds dirty. And that's why I said, I'm talking to you knowing that this can impact my ever getting elected. But there again, it's not the issue of getting elected, it's the idea of cleaning house. And whether the same individual, you know, the assistant to the city manager, has recently wrote a letter to the senior sampler, the editor there, complaining about the articles I was writing, not the content thereof, but the fact that I would gather information and the way it was put together. And so when you look at these whole things in totality, you have someone who's actually on the city, works for the city. We have questions of complying with ordinances in conflict of interest. Now we have potential lawsuit. Now we have another city employee who is, because we're talking Fourth Amendment rights, violations thereof. And now we're talking First Amendment rights. These guys are out of control. And I put it simply in one of my articles, they've gotten too big for their britches. I don't want to accuse them of committing crimes. I don't want to, I just say, I'll put it nicely and kindly. They've gotten too big for the britches. They need to be checked back in. Whether they've gone to school here their whole lives or whether they're born and bred here, that has no difference.
So are you used a phrase there, it's time to clean house. Is that what you think needs to happen, is we need to clean house over there?
I think we need to start from the top. I think it's time that we have a new mayor, and I think it's time that we have employees comply with all of the policies and procedures within the city that prohibit them from being involved politically when they're while during their course of employment. That is wrong, and it's not fair to everyone else, and those things need to be cleaned up. And that's going to impact, because that comes right from your city manager. If your city manager is not doing his job, because he does a good job in so many areas, but there's some areas that have gotten lax in. And when you've been a city manager for 38 years, and the mayor's been there for 30 years, they have developed a feeling of proprietorship. They feel they own the city. It's theirs to do with what they want, when they want, and they can take the money from one fund to spend it on another, on their pet projects, without open and complete discussion with the public at large on some of these very, very important issues. That's what I'm saying needs to be cleaned up.
So you're saying there's actual government officials over at the city, they have fear that if you get elected that you're going to go in there and you're actually going to fire employees who are engaged in inappropriate conduct.
Sometimes, you know, when I mentioned to you that we were circulating in getting signatures for a petition to put districts on the ballot so we could have representation in all these districts. You wouldn't see all this money that has to be spent and what's taking place now. Do you know that when they come out, this actually happened. Have a city employee comes out and he says, and I asked him to sign the petition. This is not to say yes or no, just to put it on the ballot. And the city employee says, I can't, Ed, I'm afraid I'll lose my job. His wife comes out and she said, I don't work for the city, I'll sign it. That type of intimidation, whether it be in the animal shelter issues that we've encountered, or whether it be in just getting employees to be able to feel free to express any thoughts or ideas or observations they may have had, when you're reluctant and you put a damper on that type of freedom of expression, then I think that goes against the American way, and it's not what I would expect as in support of my constitutional rights as an American. That's what I'm saying.
I have a theory, Ed, and my theory is we have politicians who are weak, politicians who won't stand up to evil forces, wherever they come from. And what can you tell the voters that you're a guy who has a moral compass, if you will, and who's going to stand up to this type of nonsense that's going on? What's your background? What is it that drives you that says this stuff that's going on needs to stop, it's nonsense, and we need to clean house? Where is it you come from, and where do you find that internal driving force that says, I'm going to stop it?
What drives me is just, we're talking government issues. I'm not talking in your personal life, how you conduct yourself,
Right.
although that can be looked at. I'm talking about just government and how the government performs. And when I look at those things, it's the way you're raised. You've seen the American flag out in front of the house.
Right.
Because I believe, and I was taught that when you're an American, regardless of what color you are or where you came from, you're as good as anybody else. And you should be treated equally and fairly. And I've been taught that we have a constitution, that we have protections, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, right to be free from having somebody come into your home and search your property or your personal belongings without due process, without a search warrant. Those things are dear to our hearts. That's what gives us individual liberty that allows us to go out and do business, to be able to live our lives and make decisions for ourselves. What's going on federally, and you listen a lot about the Obama administration, I don't find a lot of difference between our local city government and some of the ways that they operate. They control the press for the most part. The only reason this election's getting out with a lot of this information is because now we have the internet. We have Facebook. Now we can get these things out that couldn't come out before. And you have a lot of businesses, by the way, some of the intimidations that went on, where you'd have council people or someone else go to a business and say, you don't want to support Ed, because, if you do that, we're not going to be happy with you. I've even gone to businesses, wanted to put my sign out in front of the business, and they said, no, Ed, can't do that, I don't want the mayor mad at me. What kind of nonsense is that? That is just plain, that type of intimidation is why it's what gets me riled up. And if they were just respectful in the way they conduct their business at all times, and make sure the city employees are always respectful in dealing with the public, I think that goes a long ways with keeping individuals like me, with my temperament, who when you're pushed around, I believe Americans stand up for themselves. I believe Americans stand up for the little guy and support the ones who are weaker and can't do it. I can't stand up, everyone can't stand up to the big money interest in this town, but we can talk about it, and we can make sure that the little guy is treated right, whether it be bus transportation on Sundays for those that can't afford to get to the doctor or can't go to church, or whether it's where we're going to spend the money on a bigger priority on monuments coming into the city or roundabouts, or whether we have air quality control. What's more important? And that's where I part company with some of the way the city has conducted business, and if you dare to talk to them, you know, oh man, you're destructive. You know, you're really rocking the boat here. You shouldn't be doing that, because these guys are good guys. After all, they were born and bred here, and they go to church here. Well, you know, that's not all that's involved in being a good American and being a good citizen. So I get riled up, and at my age, I'm able to speak out to these issues. Now, I mentioned this article about a new broom sweeping clean. I've gotten replies to that article, and some people said, well, Ed, my concerns is does Jane Doe or John Doe over here that's running for office, are they going to have the strength to push the broom? Well, I'll tell you, I've been in now over 10 years, I've seen the rubber stamps.
Right.
You know, when I first started out, every issue that came up, all five voted in the same way, because they had this agreement. Everything,
Right.
we act in unison.
Are
You don't see any dissension.
you going to push the broom?
I'm going to push the broom. That's exactly what they know I will do. That's exactly why they've circled wagons for 10 years and kept me out. And it's been part of that process, and that's okay. I'm okay with it. I don't take it personal. This is not a personal thing. It's just like doing business. And that's why I still try to be friendly with Dan. I try to be friendly with Gary, Esplin, the city manager, and even all the employees. But you know, over 10 years, I've had a lot of phone calls from city employees. I've had phone calls from businessmen in town who have reported to me their concerns and the fact we haven't had a level playing field. And under the guise sometimes of the good old boys are taking care of themselves. What we mean is, it's selective enforcement. Whether the mayor comes out a few years back and he said, I don't want any enforcement of parking on trucks in a certain area. Where does he get the authority to say that you can violate the law? Either you take the statute off the books, which we talked about earlier, or you enforce the law. But you can't say you have permission to violate the law because of this, this, or that.
But you don't.
Yeah. So it's those little types of things that build up. When you add those up over a period of time, and you add up what blew up with our animal shelter, you know, the allegations of coercion, and you can see it. You know, the allegations.
Is that consistent with what you've seen?
That's very consistent with what I've seen. And so that's what bothers me, and that's what drives me. And it's real simple for me. It's just an injustice. It's trying to do what's right, and that everybody's treated fairly.
Right.
And perhaps because you know I happen to have a Hispanic name, and so some people say, "In no way you're ever going to get elected, Ed," just because of that in itself. And you know what I say? I said that's nonsense. I give more credit to the people of St. George and to the values that they hold. I don't believe that for a second. I think it's just based on the issues. And the mayor and the city manager play hardball when it comes to losing authority. And that's why when this last issue, when the mayor put forth that we should give the city manager a 4% raise in salary because he hadn't had a raise for so long, and city employees aren't getting those same raises, you have to ask yourself, what is going on? Really, what are we doing here? Are we treating everything fair and equal?
So, are you ready to play hardball?
I always play hardball, and you know, as far as with my reluctance is that my age, I didn't come here to raise hell with everybody, but I didn't come here to be pushed around.
Right.
Whether it's in St. George or any place else, that's just not the American way.
And this interview's kind of gone a different direction than I thought it was going to go. And
you ask me questions, I'm going to give you answers.
I think it's fantastic. And, you know, one of the things I told you, I will give you the last word, and I think you may have had it. Is there anything else that you want to tell the voters out there, or anything about you, or what it is you plan to do, other than we've already discussed?
It's just simply about doing the right thing, being respectful, setting priorities that allow you to spend the city funds and city money where the citizens want it spent, not where a handful of individuals want, or what their special interest groups might be, whether it's trucking company or a chamber businesses or just the guy next door. It's setting your priorities and having some accountability. We have not had a lot of accountability, whether it's on our ethics, conflict of interest needs to be, we need to have ethic reform here. That's what it gets down to. And so if we have priorities, accountability, and transparency involving the community, having people have input of what they want in their city, a part of the city they live in. Because what I want here is not the same that Little Valley wants, where their equestrian is, or what Bloomington may have, or what the west side Dixie area. So, and that's why I thought districts would be beneficial, because they would allow a broader input of our thoughts and ideas. But these guys don't want that. They want to keep it right where they got it,
Right.
and they don't. 5 council people, they can pretty well control it. We've had rubber stamps and rubber stamps,
Absolutely.
and that's what's taken place. So if you did move forward and we had 7 city councilmen, and maybe if you could have them at districts with 2 at large, but we'd have broader representation, and you wouldn't have this tight control that you have. These guys really run it, and nobody knows about it because we're all happy, because after all, they were born here, they go to church here, so they can't be bad.
Right.
But if you go back in time and you remember President Hinckley said, when you're in business, you do business. Never mind if they're members of the church. You conduct good business, and you make sure that everything is right, and not accept it just because of who they are or who we expect them to be. Because sometimes we're disappointed, and that's where accountability comes in. Checks and balances. That's all I'm asking for.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay.